Hello and welcome to this webinar, an interview with Jo Rees. I am very excited to be here with Jo, ready to have a good old chat. As per usual, when I talk to someone, I've chosen someone like myself again, who's very quiet, doesn't say much, is very shy, lots of chatter. Jo, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to give just a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I am Jo Rees. I live on the Isle of Wight. I don't know why that's relevant, but I just like to kind of share that. I live on the Isle of Wight and I'm a specialist dyslexic assessor and teacher. I'm also dyslexic myself and have 3 children who all have dyslexic profiles. I'm an ex-primary school teacher and Senko, and I run my own little business called Another Way Round Dyslexia Support.
Brilliant.
There you go, me in a nutshell.
That is fantastic. And straight away, like Jo and I realised we've got lots of similarities. We both started off as primary school teachers with a strong interest in special needs. I haven't got 3 delightfully dyslexic children. I just have the one, and one who is more or less neurotypical, I guess. But yeah, I think we've got that shared passion and shared interest because of our own experiences, both professionally and personally, which it makes a big difference, doesn't it? And I think I found over the years that I've been working within the dyslexia field, there are so many people like us who have got involved and members of their family are dyslexic or they themselves are dyslexic. And I guess it's a natural thing, isn't it? And
sure.
To share knowledge and help people. So can you just talk a little bit about how being dyslexic affects who you are, if you can explain that?
Yeah, I will do my best. So I think my story is interesting because I didn't actually get my diagnosis of dyslexia until I was an adult. So I was 34 when I got my diagnosis of dyslexia. So I lived a big bulk of my life, all of my childhood, not realizing that the things that I was finding difficult were as a result of being dyslexic. And that actually had a huge impact on my confidence and my self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, when I trained to become a teacher, I was the first person in my family that had ever been to university. And I did a degree in dance, drama and English, which won't surprise you because I played to my strengths. And then I did a postgraduate certificate in teaching. And my dad had a really negative educational experience. And basically, I became a teacher because I wanted to kind of change the narrative for children like my dad. I wanted them to have a more positive experience. And I found myself quite quickly, within a year of being a teacher, I became a Senko because I just kind of was attracted to children that learn differently. I kind of made it my challenge to try and work out why they weren't learning something and what could I do to kind of help them help them kind of retain or learn that information. And I think because of that, it was like, oh, you're actually really good, Jo, with children with additional needs, so you can become the Senko. So I became a Senko, and I thought I knew what dyslexia was at that point because I had done my hour and a half on my postgraduate certificate, because that is all you get on a postgraduate certificate is about an hour. So, I was pretty sure that I kind of knew what dyslexia was. It was reversing B's and D's, and it was children that were struggling with reading and spelling. So when I had my own child, and he kind of started school and was beginning to struggle, I was a little bit confused, but it kind of was like fortunate fate. I don't know what it was, but literally at exactly that same time, I was approached by the local authority to retrain as a specialist dyslexic teacher. They had a position that they wanted me to fill. And it was when I did my specialist training, I was 28. I did the training and I was like, oh my goodness, all of these things that I find difficult are actually as a result of being dyslexic. And I realized that I knew nothing about dyslexia really at all. And I think at the time, me finding out whether I was dyslexic or not didn't feel important, because my son was struggling, and it felt more important to get the right support and the right things in place for him. He didn't actually get a formal diagnosis until much, much later, because he didn't need it. He was always supported well in school. But I actually got my diagnosis a few years later. And for me, I felt it was really important, because if I'd achieved what I'd have achieved not knowing, imagine what I could have achieved knowing that I was dyslexic. But actually, again, it wasn't really about me. It was about, if I know what I'm looking for and I'm right in as much as I am dyslexic, and even though I kind of knew in my gut and I'd done the training, it was almost having that piece of paper to actually prove it, that actually then I would know what I was looking for and how many more people could I help. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers that question. If I've gone,
I think it does. Yeah, it is all about who you are, and I think it's that kind of, you can't really separate out the Jo and the dyslexia. It's all in together. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess because you had managed to get as far as you did without knowing, you had already built up strategies without specifically realizing they were strategies to help with your dyslexia.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the amazing things about dyslexia, but also one of the confusing things about dyslexia for people that don't understand it, is that we are actually, you know, our strengths, because dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty as opposed to a general difficulty with learning. You know, it's a learning difference. We can learn, we just learn differently. And I think that we find ways to compensate or mask weaknesses, and so therefore we can keep it hidden. And actually, I don't know if you know, but I've written a memoir book. I don't want to plug it, but I've written a book outlining my experiences. So it's called Don't Forget to Smile, and it outlines my experiences of living with undiagnosed dyslexia. And for me, that was important, because it was about kind of showing where dyslexia hides and where you can kind of find it, and where you kind of need to tease it out a little bit. And as you've said, I think for me, the big thing about my diagnosis was I needed to understand that my brain, it wasn't me that was finding things difficult. It was that my brain thought differently. So actually, the empowering thing that the diagnosis gave me really was to just kind of really play to my strengths, and that those strategies and things that I had in place were right for me. And I think because at the time I was working in a school which is very institutional, and you have to do the planning in a certain way, and you have to do this in a certain way, and I am actually not very good at complying. And it's not because I'm difficult, but it's because actually I realized that it was because in order to play to my strengths, I can't necessarily do things the same way as the person next to me. However, I'm really conscientious and I've got a really strong work ethic. So it shouldn't matter how I do my planning or how I get the best out of my children, as long as I get the best out of my children. Does that make sense?
100%. And I'm just thinking of so many examples when I've had similar conversations with people, and about children and about teachers, of how we shouldn't be asking all teachers to teach in the same way, because you can't, because you teach in a way that works for you and works for the students. If you say that everyone has to deliver it in a certain way, it's not going to happen. Yes, we're all aiming for the same thing, but yes, I've had lots of conversations like that. And you talking about that sort of realization of why you've had difficulties in the past, it's exactly what I say to parents when they come to me and say, oh, well, I think my child might be dyslexic, but I haven't said anything to them and I don't think they should know. I'm like, why not? But your child is probably at the moment feeling really bad about themselves because they know there's something going on. And they know they should, that horrible word, should be able to do things that they can't. And then once you explain, and certainly with my own son, and he's actually never had a formal diagnosis, but everything along the way, like access arrangements and everything, everyone's gone, yeah, absolutely, you're right. Explaining to him that this is why certain things are hard, and absolutely no way are you stupid. But this is why sometimes you felt like that, because you think about it differently. So when you're asked to do things in exactly the same way as everyone else is doing, but your brain is actually being really clever and doing it in a different way, that's why you're feeling like you are. And I've noticed myself with my son how he's really proud to be dyslexic. He's quite happy to tell everyone that he's dyslexic. He often tells me as soon as he's found out that someone else is dyslexic, oh, so and so at college is dyslexic, and blah, blah. Oh, that's great, you know. And he'll laugh about it, but not in a putting himself down way, but things like when he's playing Xbox with friends, he'd be like, oh, I made a mistake. It's because I didn't have my 25% extra time because I'm dyslexic. And his friends are really supportive of him and him being dyslexic. When he was at secondary school, some of his friends nominated him for an award in some business studies assignment they were doing because of the fact he's dyslexic and he thinks differently. And it was just so lovely that they could see the benefits as well and see some of his strengths that are associated with dyslexia. So what you said absolutely makes sense. And you talked about some of your strengths, which is what I wanted to move on to actually.
Yeah.
Sort of what are some of the key strengths for you and for your children that you think are partly to do with the fact that your brain does think differently?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you use that kind of stupid word. So I think until I got my diagnosis, I just genuinely believed that I wasn't very clever. So I'd never got an A for an essay or an exam. Yeah, if you knew the amount of effort that I'd put in. And now I know, and quite often I use it when I write reports, you know, effort is not equaling attainment. Like you can see how hard somebody is working. But because my experiences at school and then potentially in the workplace as well, kind of the narrative told me, well, there must be, you're obviously not very clever or you're not very compliant because actually you're not a top performer, which is interesting because I was a top performer in one way. So one of the things I was really good at was, and I'm still really good at, is I'm really good at building relationships with children very quickly. And actually, I've just done a TikTok video about that this week, about how I believe many people with dyslexia are brilliant at reading the unsaid. So, you know, body language, tone of voice, kind of, they can read a room so quickly, kind of suss out the hierarchy. And I think both myself and my son are amazing at building relationships. My son is actually much better than me at it, but it is something we've both got. And he has this amazing ability to talk to anyone. He just knows what to say. I think because, and is this part of me or is this because of my experience? I don't know. But I think I'm very good at identifying when potentially somebody needs help and kind of looking and working out those signs to go, you're telling me you understand, but I know you don't, because I totally recognize that facial expression.
That fake face of, okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I've got it. No, you haven't. I think resilience is up there because for me, nothing has ever come easy. I've had to work really hard at it. So actually, if I decide I'm going to do something, then I will go all out and I'll be really dedicated. And I'm very good at kind of getting up and dusting myself off and keeping going. Now, that's not to say that that isn't difficult at times, but I'm quite driven. If I think something's achievable, I will kind of find a way to get there. I think those are kind of the key ones really. And I think for me, it's interesting. I think I'm still finding strengths all the time, the braver I get with it. And I think social media for me, so we haven't really talked about it here, but you found me through social media. So I've been working quite hard on social media, initially just because I wanted to build a bit of a community because I didn't want to feel quite so alone. But I think it's interesting, the more I talk about dyslexia on social media and the more people kind of share their experiences with me, or actually when I create a video about something that's a potential dyslexic strength, people go, oh yeah, I've experienced that too, or I've noticed that too. Yeah. I think I'm still discovering my strengths and what I'm really good at. You know, I'm very creative, and I think so often we hear that word creative and we immediately think of the arts, but actually creative is about problem solving in a creative way, kind of thinking thinking round things. So my company is actually called Another Way Round, which was initially a bit of a play on kind of square pegs sort of being round, but actually my best friend will say, when I want to do something, I will always find another way round. So it doesn't matter if it takes me longer, I will find the way to get to where I want to get to. But I think for me, I've come to finding my strengths late. I think for my children, they really enjoy and are quite good at music and performing.
I was going to say about the form, because you mentioned drama as part of your first degree.
Yeah.
And I know one of your children's recently been doing some acting.
Yeah. So they are also, my son is really, really musical, and the girls are really into musical theatre. And for me, what has been brilliant is these things that they've really enjoyed have actually been vehicles to support them in areas that they find more difficult. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So my son, when he was learning the trumpet, he took exams. So he used to struggle to remember the scales, surprise, surprise, because, you know, it's a memory thing and it's a routine. So he used to, you know, have to practice those. He used to kind of have to Google or YouTube them if he couldn't remember. So then when he was struggling with maths equations or learning maths processes, I was able to say to him, right, come on, have a bit of patience with yourself. How did you learn that music scale? And he'd say, well, I'd had to practice it and I had to Google it and And I go, brilliant, use those skills to support you in those areas that you find more difficult. You know, my youngest daughter, we know that people with dyslexia struggle with organization. And actually, I'm going to touch wood when I say this. I used to lose things all the time, and she's pretty good at not losing stuff, but it's because she's got amazing strategies in place. So she was just in a show last week. So one of the things she gets quite anxious about, she can do it, she gets anxious about, is cues, knowing when she needs to come on and off the stage, which side she needs to be. You know, we know left and right is tricky. So she will write her own cue sheet out that she has in her dressing room, and she'll stick it each side of the stage so that she knows that she can check it as many times as she needs to. And then the other thing that she has is she has a box that she takes in with all of her stuff in, which is a chaotic mess in the box. But it just means that she can keep all of her stuff in the box and it doesn't get mixed up with anybody else's. And then at the end, she can just literally pick her box up and come out. And those strategies kind of really support her organization and stop that anxiety that can sometimes come, which then impacts how well you can perform or how well you're able to carry out a task. But again, those strategies that she's developed through the things she's loved, she's able to apply to her school bag. She's able to apply to every day. You know, she's got a copy of her timetable up on the wall in her room, so she knows which books she needs to take in, which equipment she needs to take in. She can check that as many times as you need to. You know, and some people might say, oh, well, we're a half a term in now, she should know it by now. Well, actually, you don't. And sometimes you just want that reassurance. So for her, they've built, because they've known since they were so little, but also because I just naturally have put the strategies in place, they're a little bit ahead of the game, really.
Which is so important, isn't it? It makes such a difference. And I was really interested seeing your social media earlier the week about the cue sheets and about the box. I mean, that's just amazing. I do a fair bit of amateur dramatics myself, and a box, that's what I need, because I end up with bits everywhere and not knowing where it is. And kind of in my case, I'm not dyslexic, but I'm actually going through the process as an adult of finding out if I actually have ADHD, which I'm pretty confident I do have. And there are various things on the strategies and which are similar and have overlap, and it's really fascinating to see. And just when I saw your post about her, I was like, that's amazing that she takes the initiative to do it. And something I've always explained to parents when I've run workshops and things is that as parents, we automatically want to support our children. But the most important thing to do is to get them to be independent. And if we keep doing it for them, they're never going to build that up. Now, I always say as well, I think this is partly because maybe I'm a lazy mum and I want them to get on and do things, but it seems to have worked at 16 and 18. They are now doing more things themselves. But I just thought, I can't remember everything for them. And then what are they going to do if I'm not around? So I did things like when both of mine, I did it for both of them to help them both. But particularly with my son in mind, when they were little and at primary school with their book bags just had a little laminated sheet, sort of like a credit card size, with the days of the week and what they need, whether they needed PE bag on this day or whatever, and put it on a key ring, added it to their book bag, and then it was their responsibility to look at it. Now, initially, I obviously also reminded them of like, okay, have we looked at it? And then it got to the point where they would just do that automatically. And I think that's so important to gradually move that responsibility from you to them. And it sounds like you've automatically done that. And I think I have. And I think sometimes it can be difficult for us because we've always worked in this area. We've got the professional and the personal knowledge to understand what it's like for a standard parent who doesn't automatically know that's what they should be doing. And so hopefully this kind of thing is the kind of thing that will be really helpful for other parents listening.
Definitely. And I think, even if you haven't got a neurodiverse child, these strategies help everyone just be more efficient and kind of less anxious, for sure.
And it is that anxiety. And the problem with anxiety is as soon as you start getting anxious, your brain isn't as clear and as focused. So something you might find a little bit difficult, you get anxious because you're finding it difficult, and you find it even more difficult. It's like a sort of a nasty trick, isn't it? So absolutely that idea of having a crib sheet or something to just check, even if most of the time you don't need it, the fact it's there will help so much for children and adults. That's absolutely absolutely key. I just want to say before we move on, I can see there's a couple of questions in the questions tab. I am going to make sure we wrap up by about 25 to, so we've got time to go to those questions and discuss them. If other people have questions, please feel free to pop those in as well. I am noticing them but not reading them yet. Otherwise I'll end up going off on a real tangent. So you've talked a lot about strategies. Are there any specific strategies that you haven't already mentioned that you particularly suggest to students you're working with or parents of children with dyslexia?
Well, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because it really does depend on where you are in your journey and what support you've got going on in your school. I mean, one of the things that comes up time and time again is phonological awareness. And that for me, so often that gets lumped in with phonics, and it's completely different. It's that awareness of knowing, how many syllables there are in a word, how to separate words into individual sounds, and also the multisensory teaching for reading and spelling. So really thinking about that connection between the kind of letter that we're writing down and taking strain away from working memory. And if I'm honest, that's why I'm really interested in Touch Type Read Spell. It was actually, I reached out to you, didn't I? I was like, could you tell me more about this product?
We were like two excited school children, weren't we? Can you tell me more? I was like, yes, but can we talk more? Because I follow you and I love you.
But I think in all seriousness, when I did my specialist dyslexic training, one of the things they teach you with spelling, so the process for reading is slightly different to the process for spelling. So they actually teach you to teach the children to name the letters as they write, which actually, when you're handwriting, is tricky in a way, because the lowercase letter obviously looks different from the letter that you're potentially naming. Whereas when you're typing, you've only got capitals. So you just need to remember to hit your capital for the start of your sentence or whatever. But actually, I think that Touch Type Read Spell is really good because it kind of supports that evidence-based teaching that I kind of learned when I was doing my specialist training. And also, increasingly, I think there will come a time when we don't handwrite anymore. I don't think we're there yet. But, I think the idea of being able to teach spelling through typing, for me, is really powerful. Particularly, you touched on it with your son, exam access arrangements, use of a laptop now is dead easy to get for an exam if it's your usual way of working. So actually, if we're learning to spell words through typing, that's going to massively support that. And it's actually a product that I really wish was around when my son is through school now, unfortunately. But I really wish that I'd found this a couple of years ago, because I definitely would have got him on this. It would have made a really big difference. And I think the other thing that I really like about Touch Type Read Spell is I'll quite often put a recommendation in. So again, we want to be taking as much strain away as we can from short-term working memory and making things automatic. So quite often when students move from primary to secondary and the curriculum cramps up a bit, they quite often go to secondary with weak reading skill already, and then they're thrust into a science lesson or a geography lesson, and they're expected to learn what sometimes feels like a whole other language, like a whole other vocabulary of words that they just don't hear enough to be able to kind of even move it to long-term memory really verbally, let alone read or spell it. So I think the other thing that's really important is getting hold of that topic and subject specific vocabulary. It's always a recommendation in my reports, and getting that on flashcards so that you're really familiar with that vocabulary. And I know you mentioned when we chatted that you can actually put that vocabulary into touch, type, read, spell, can't you?
You can, yeah, and absolutely. And you've led beautifully into me being able to talk about how my son has used TTRS over the years. And actually that was my first experience with touch, type, read and spell. I was a full-time working mum at the time teaching, and was limited on time, I won't lie. By this time I knew my son most probably had dyslexia. We were doing little things to help. Mainly I just wanted to avoid his confidence being knocked and make sure he could access the curriculum as best he could, and to make sure he was achieving his own potential. And I'm pretty sure from my quick look at one of the questions, this links quite well with one of the questions that we'll come back to later as well, about it's about your own potential, not about being average, whatever that is. And so I initially thought, I saw it in one of the dyslexia chat groups, something about touch, type, read and spell. Was like, oh, will it really help with reading and spelling? Oh, well, it doesn't matter because touch typing is really going to help him. His dad, who is dyslexic as well, just happened to learn to touch type as part of one of his GCSEs many years ago, and it's really helped him in life, in personal and professional life. And I thought, well, yeah, it'd be really good for my son to learn how to type. And I set up a little reward chart with some kind of rubbish reward from Poundland or something when he'd done so many weeks, and said, right, 3 times a week, you're going to do this. Here's your account, get on with it. And I now run weekly webinars telling parents and teachers the best way to get the most out of TTRS and all the different things you can do. But ultimately, with my own son, I just put him on it, and the program does lead you through it. And it was so valuable because it meant he started secondary school being able to touch type. Now, when he first started secondary school, he didn't want to be seen to be different and use a laptop or Chromebook in class, even though he was given that offer. Later on, he did start doing that. And actually, we were very lucky, the secondary school he went to, that in year 9, everyone was given Chromebooks. So it was just a normal way of working for everyone, which was amazing. But the other thing that was incredible is that his reading age had always been below his chronological age. But when he started secondary school and they did reading age tests, his chronological age was above his reading age was above his chronological age. And honestly, my initial reaction was they've made a mistake. And then I thought, hang on, no, actually, he does actually read now. He can read. Like, when did that happen? And of all the little bits and bobs we'd put into place, it suddenly clicked. And I was like, yes, touch, type, read and spell. It's not just a name. It really actually works. And so to see that in action from that multisensory approach, the other thing that I think worked well for him and for students I've worked with, so often if a child is struggling with reading or spelling, we get them to do more of the same thing. And we know as adults, if there's something we can't do very well or we don't like doing, the worst thing is to do more of it. Whereas with touch, type, read and spell, you're just learning to type. So you're learning a new skill, and it's almost a subconscious thing that's happening because of the clever way it's been designed. And it's evidence-based. There's lots of research as to why it works, and that multi-sensory approach of hearing, seeing, typing, and actually some students will say the words as they're typing as well. It really does help, and it gradually builds up that spelling and reading development as well as the typing. So for my son, that was amazing. And then actually we used him as a little bit of a guinea pig in the last year, because what you were saying about writing down cue cards and keywords and phrases to then help in exams, we've got various subjects within TTRS that start from real basics, like sort of key stage 1 type of topics, But we've also now added in GCSE revision for sciences, for business studies, religious studies. I think there's one other that I've now forgotten. Geography, that's the one. And with our idea being that someone who's already using TTRS and got some typing skills can then go onto these subjects in typing out keywords and phrases, and then sometimes it has the meaning, sometimes it will just be used in a sentence. Those words and phrases become really familiar. And then when they sit in exam, instead of looking at the question thinking, well, what does that mean? What's that word? I'm not familiar with that. Immediately, there's that recognition, that understanding, and then they can use their working memory and their time to compose an answer rather than, oh my goodness, I should be moving on to the next question now, and I'm still only just working out what it's asking me to do. And I spent several months in webinars saying that we'll see in a few months' time how well things go with this. And I'm always reluctant, especially with people who are neurodiverse, to put too much emphasis on exams because I don't think it plays to their strengths. But I have to say, he did exactly what we asked him to do, focused on getting his English was the key one for him that was a bit wobbly, and I ended up absolutely fine, so he didn't have to kind of worry about it again, and he got through all of his GCSEs. And I do think this kind of approach really, really helped, and I would recommend it for other people. And it also, that importance of, if you're going to use a keyboard in an exam, it's no good saying to a student 6 weeks before the exams, well, you've used a laptop before, haven't you? You're all right with it. And them using like the method, hunt and peck, where it's like, because actually that's not going to be beneficial. And if a student has got that level of typing, it probably would be better just to use pen and paper, but it's not ideal. So teaching them to type with something like TTRS that has that approach that's multi-sensory, it's purposely distraction-free. It was designed initially for people with dyslexia, but over the years we've developed it so that it's very much suitable for, well, absolutely everyone, but with a real focus on people with neurodiversity. So we have a lot of people using it with ADHD, autism, all sorts of differences really, so that it's effective and it's motivating. It's little short modules, so it's not that I'll sit for hours and do it. We actually say between 10 and 30 minutes at a time is absolutely sufficient. You don't really have to go over that sort of length of session. So yeah, it is really, I've seen personally and professionally how powerful it is. I also actually use it with some of my students. I do some private tutoring, and some tutors are set up as touch typing tutors. I don't use it like that. I use it as part of a normal session. So, for instance, one of my students at the moment who's using it for general boost in maths and English, he's year 5, and his reading and spelling does need to increase. And I think it would be really helpful for him to be able to touch type when he goes to secondary school and throughout life. So we do 10 minutes out of an hour a tutoring session on touch typing, and then he'll do a couple of 10-minute sessions at home in the week, and you can see how it's helping things to progress. His confidence is building and he's making links with other things. So there are lots of different ways you can use it, as a teacher, tutor, parent, or just as an individual. Just it does guide you through it, and tell you what to do, and there's a lot of support available. So yeah, hopefully that gives a little overview to people of what Touch Type Read and Spell is about. I'm conscious that we've only got 10 minutes to go, so I think we will start looking at those questions, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in. If we have time left after the questions, Jo and I have got lots more we can talk about.
Yeah, definitely.
So the question we have here is, my son has recently been diagnosed with dyslexia. He's created very successful coping strategies and masks very well. How interesting. This popped up before you started talking about strategies and masking. I'm struggling to get his school to put in strategies because he is successful, but I feel he could be even more successful in school if these were in place. Does that make sense? Well, firstly, I want to say yes, 100%, and then I'll pass over to Jo to answer that.
Oh, it's so tricky because support in schools is really inconsistent, and it is all connected to budget. And you will find that So every school, primary and secondary, should have what we call an SEN offer, which is on their website, which should outline what their provision looks like for pupils with autism, for pupils with dyslexia. It should outline the resources and interventions that they've got. But my professional and my personal experience is exactly as you've said there, that actually it's those average attaining pupils that do get missed. I think it's about going back and speaking to the Senko and building a good relationship with the Senko if you can, because you need them on side, and just kind of checking in, is there anything more they can do? The other thing you can do is if, like, so often people with dyslexia know what they need to be successful. So when I coach or work with young people, quite often I say, tell me what really works for you. Tell me what really doesn't work for you. And actually just having that conversation and asking them those two questions can be really enlightening. You know, so actually, if you can go to your Senko if you can have those, ask your son those questions and jot down some notes. Well, actually, this teacher, it's going really well because they're providing handouts in advance, or actually it's not going as well in this lesson because he's finding that he can't copy things off of the PowerPoint. Like, is it possible for the teacher to give that to him in advance? Like, if you kind of can go to the Senko almost with some solutions of things that he potentially needs, it's going to be much more difficult for them to say no. Whereas if you go and say, I think my son needs more support, then it's going to be kind of more tricky. And you will always find there are some teachers that get it and some teachers that don't. That is the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But that would be, I think, where I would start. The other thing I would say, and I'm just hitting the next question here as well. So the next question says he's realised he can use voice-to-text methods on his iPad. Is this something to encourage or help him build confidence in trying to type? I always say that we have to get them through school, but actually school is a really short bit of their life and we need to be skilling them up for everyday life as well. And probably, depending on what job he does, he's probably, yes, he needs to learn to type, needs to learn to write, but depending on what he does, he can probably get away with using voice to text, and increasingly with AI coming in as well. So what I would say is it's all about balance. Like, encourage him for sure to be typing sometimes, but actually on those occasions where he's using voice to text as well, that's okay. You know, and there are some brilliant apps out there as well that you can dictate whole essays into. I mean, my son did his whole CV like that. Like, he uses voice to text often. He can type. Like I say, I really wish I'd found this a few years ago because I really feel like it would have made a big difference to him. But I think it's all about balance and using a variety of strategies and knowing that not everything works for everybody, and that's okay. Like, sometimes you do have to try things out, realize it's not going to work for you, and then move on to the next thing. And that's why at the moment I'm personally trying to work with lots of different products, because I want people to know what's out there so that they can make an informed choice on what is right for them.
100%. Yeah, I obviously totally agree with everything Jo's just said there. And that whole idea of going with solutions. I know in a way you feel like maybe you shouldn't have to do that because the school's the expert.
Yeah.
But put yourself in the place of a teacher in school. They are bombarded. They've got such a big workload. They are there because they want to help students learn.
Yeah.
But they can almost lose sight of that amongst all the planning and this and that and the Ofsted inspections and everything else. So if you can do a bit of your own research and just talking to your son, as Jo said, about what works for him and what doesn't, and what you've noticed at home, there'll be things that you've noticed if you put things a certain way, he actually does or remembers what you've asked him to do. Whereas if you do it another way, he doesn't. Go to them with those things and it makes a huge difference. It also shows that you're accepting that you're willing to help as well. It's not just you do it all for me. That communication between parents and schools is so important. And I'm always very honest when I talk about this, that there was a brief period of time, I'd say, where I got this wrong with my son because I got really frustrated with the school because I didn't feel they were doing what they should be. And it's emotive, isn't it? Because as a parent, you want the best for
Yeah.
your child. And even though I was a teacher as well, so should have been able to see it from every angle, I was getting really worked up, and I had to sort of take a step back and go, actually, this isn't helping anyone. What is the way forward? What can happen? And I had a fantastic experience in year 6 with my son, with a teacher who had worked specifically with dyslexic children before. So she had a really good idea of what was going on. And she'd messaged me during the summer holidays and said, Liz, send me over everything that helps Josh to learn. So, okay, brilliant. So I did that. And then it actually meant I then had that when he went on to secondary school. And some things adapted a bit or developed, some things weren't necessary anymore. And that was really useful. So secondary school hadn't specifically asked for it, but I sent it, and they were fantastic at taking that into consideration right the way through.
I also think it's really important to acknowledge, and I actually did acknowledge very early on, that there was going to be an element that school can't provide. Like, it is, at the end of the day, he's my child, and it's kind of not my problem that he's got a learning difference, but I have to take responsibility for that as well. So, you know, I did seek extra tuition at different times, or see what I could kind of do with him myself, because I acknowledged that actually I was very lucky. Most of his teachers at primary, we had one year that was a bit of a disaster, but other than that, most teachers kind of got it and did put something in place. And I felt like as long as they were putting something in place and they were kind of showing willing, that was kind of enough. And the other thing we were very lucky is that lots of his teachers saw his strengths. So they really kind of enabled him to shine in the areas that he was good at, which I also think really helped. So that would be my other advice. Like, I always say, find your children's strengths. And is there any way that the school can really encourage them? And again, if the school can't, how can you bridge that gap outside of school?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things you were talking earlier about your children with music and drama and things. For my son, it's sport, particularly football. I'd say he has a strength for most sports, but football is his passion. And there were times where I just thought, we're not even going to do his reading tonight, because it's more important he goes and does what he enjoys and he feels good about himself and he achieves. And we'll catch up with the reading another time, because actually tonight he's exhausted from trying really hard in school all day. So it's not always about doing more of things. It's the right things for the right amount of time, and without the right time. About touch, type, read and spell, that's one of the good things, that it's short and sharp. And again, I agree with you on the voice to text. I'd say, as with anything, you want as many tools in your toolbox as you can. So if you can use both and sort of type as well, because there'll be different times when one or the other will be more useful. And also, from the sense of touch, type, read and spell, we are very aware that it won't be for everyone. There is not one thing that suits everybody. And one of the things we always say is there's a 30-day money back guarantee. And also for schools or tutors who are using it, it's a roll on, roll off. So if you've got 5 students and one of those students is just not taking to it, it's just not for them, that's fine. You just put someone else in that place. You haven't lost it. And I think that's so important. You can't be too salesy about it and say, well, everyone should be able to do this. This is really good for everyone, because it's not realistic. I'm conscious there's another question we better quickly get to in the last 2 minutes.
Well, and it's going to cut off, because I'm all right.
It won't cut off, so we're okay, but we shouldn't go on too long, I suppose. But thank you, in case other people are desperate to get somewhere else. So my daughter's teacher says he cannot see symptoms of dyslexia in my daughter, 11, year 6. Should I advocate, and how? Jo, I'll let you.
Okay, so I would say that, again, I would go with a list of things that you think are symptoms of dyslexia. Like, what is it you have noticed that's led you to question it? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you as the parent are the expert on your child. So I would definitely go with a list of things that you are concerned about. I would also, there are loads of free checklists online that don't diagnose, but are kind of checklists. I mean, I think the British Dyslexia Association has one. I've got one on my website that's quite different to that. But, you know, there are lots of free checklists around. Again, I would fill one of those, print one of those out and kind of take that. And I would say, could you just do a dyslexic screen? Like, most schools have a dyslexic screen, you know, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. that's great. But actually, I would be pushing for a dyslexic screen. If they really won't do it, and I would be speaking to the Senko probably, not the classroom teacher, there's Sendias available, Sandiass. They are a statutory service every local authority has to provide. They are free at point of delivery for parents. They would be able to attend meetings with you and potentially help you advocate a bit more. If not, you may have to go independently and do it. And there are people that screen as well as people that kind of like formally diagnose.
Yeah, it's probably worth explaining, isn't it? Because some people might not know the difference between screening.
Well, this is the next question, so you're ahead of the game.
There we go.
Yeah.
So yes, we've got the question here of how reliable are the dyslexia screeners that schools do in primary setting. And if I can start off with that, because I've done quite a bit of work around this and talked at some government meetings about this. Generally, from my experience, the actual screeners are quite accurate, but the results aren't always, or how they're interpreted. So there are some that have been discredited by the BDA many years ago for the outcome. The ones that sort of say index A, index B, index C, quite a few of those aren't that helpful. And I've seen myself with several students who most definitely are dyslexic, and later on get a full diagnosis, get told no signs of dyslexia at all. And it's almost some of them in the sort of statistical stage at the end level out results. So if someone's very good in one area and poor in another, oh, that's okay, you're in the middle. Whereas actually, for people who know about dyslexia, that is a classic sign of a dyslexia profile. If you've got some things that are very high, some things that are very low. So generally, the screeners themselves aren't the problem. You want to make sure the person interpreting the results really understands it. And what I often say when people come to me and say, look, we've had a screener at school, they say there's no signs. I say, well, ask the school for the full results. And generally they will share them with you. They're not always keen to, but I think I'm right in saying there is an obligation to if you ask for it. And then take it to someone who is an expert. And they can give you an idea of whether, okay, what's been used is fine and I can help you interpret it, or I need to do my own screening, or the full assessment, which is where you'll actually get a diagnosis, where the screener just tells you whether there's an indication or not.
And I would say there is a place for both things. And actually, screeners, because diagnostic assessments are really expensive, and that's another whole webinar. They're expensive because they're very skilled, and actually you're making a judgment on something that you can't see. Once you give a diagnosis, you can't take it away. So we need to be 100% sure that it's there. Whereas screens actually, and I did a TikTok video about this recently, that actually, if your school has done a dyslexic screen with your young person and they are indicated to be at risk, that is the point to put the intervention in, not to say, oh, well, now you need to go and get a formal diagnosis. Like, they can put intervention in. That screen will tell them where the strengths and weaknesses are and should enable them to access support. You shouldn't need to go and get a formal diagnosis.
And there is a lot of misunderstanding around that, isn't there? I've heard so many times people say, well, the school have suggested we should now get a formal diagnosis. And I've said, well, for what reason? If you want the formal diagnosis, and sometimes there's reasons why you need to go down that route, but if it's so that the school can support your child, the full diagnosis isn't necessary. And for me, that is the benefit of the screeners, is if it's highlighting strengths and challenges, and then the school can use the strengths to help overcome the challenges. We'll quickly pop back on this last question that's an add-on from the earlier one. So the one whose Year 6 teacher didn't think the daughter was showing symptoms of dyslexia. So you're saying that you've actually recently been diagnosed with dyslexia. I would say make sure the school know that, because it is very hereditary. More and more research has shown that. Any other advice you've got there quickly, Jo, on that?
No, I think to just do what we said, to go with that list and to just keep pushing. in a gentle way to keep the relationship there. But I think you're absolutely right to push. If you've just got a diagnosis, I completely understand your anxiety and angst that actually you don't want your daughter to go through the same. And I will just kind of shadow what Liz has said, in as much as probably echo is a better word, that actually screens, often they're administered by people that have the least amount of qualifications in a school, and they're only as good as the person that interprets them. Some of the most dyslexic young people I've assessed have not come out at risk of dyslexia on a dyslexic screen.
Yeah, so just be aware of that. The other thing that's just cropped up in my mind as well, which probably isn't something I'd normally talk about, but it's just there, so I'm going to say that be conscious that even if there are some signs of dyslexia and you're dyslexic, it may be that your child isn't. I think Jo briefly touched and said, or there could be something else similar going on. So do keep an open mind, but as Jo said, go armed with evidence, print off one of those checklists. There are a lot of checklists that you can just find online, images of, and they could have been created by anyone with no knowledge at all. So go to something like Jo's website, where you know she's a specialist, or the British Dyslexia Association, get a checklist from there, get even both of them, compared, fill in both and take them, and then you've got the evidence, and hopefully you will get the support going forward. And also, if you're comfortable with it, explain part of the reason why you're anxious is because you don't want your child to go through what you did. And you want them to have a more positive experience. Be as honest as you feel you can. We had better wrap up there, because I think we can go on all night, but it's getting very windy here, and I'm not quite sure how much longer you'll be able to hear me. Thank you so much, Jo, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's joined us on here. We are planning to do more of these interview type webinars. There should be another one being advertised fairly soon by TTRS. So do please look out for those. Stay in touch. We'll be sending you an email. Any questions you have, please feel free to get in touch with me, get in touch with Jo through social media, or feel free to come via me if you haven't found her social media. But if you haven't found it, where have you been? Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
See you later. Thank you.